Great follow-up to that would be to discuss the natural timeline of a conscious relationship. And so I developed this framework quite a few years ago. I mean, probably close to 5 years ago now. And the reason I really put this together was because I was getting a lot of questions. People were asking, like, what should I expect? When is a good time to take it from casual to committed? Like when is the time when you have that conversation? Or, at what point should we expect to be like in a real relationship? And I was getting a lot of these questions, and I really sat down and I looked at the experience of myself and my wife. I looked at the experience of my successful clients, the ones who have really found that special someone and are living that dream now. I looked at the relationship between some of my close friends and colleagues and how their relationship unfolded. And what I realized by looking at all these different relationships, and these, these were not just people who were just hooking up, right? And I think it's important to say that because relationships can unfold all kinds of different ways when they are gone into unconsciously. And I'd say 90% of relationships in the world are gone into unconsciously, right? Like most people, when they get connected, they don't get connected because they've had a really clear intention about what they're looking for. They've been connected to it for a long period of time. They've been consciously inviting that into their life. They've been preparing for it. They've been patient. They've been doing the self-work. Right? Like that is not the way that most people start relationships. And it's important to say that because what I'm going to talk about today, I'm talking specifically about people who begin relationships consciously. And so for people who don't begin them consciously, what most people are doing is most people are just kind of, Ram Dass put it like this. And if anybody knows Ram Dass, he's one of the great spiritual teachers of our time. He's made a huge, profound impact on my life. I'd say like so much of how I understand life comes directly from what he taught. But what Ram Dass said, and this landed for me so much when I heard it, is he said that, we operate like hungry ghosts. And it's like we feel so empty and we're just trying to like grasp at love. We're just trying to get some love to fill us up. But the thing is like we're like ghosts. And so we get a little bit of love, but we can't really hold on to it. It just goes right through us. And so we're clinging for more and more and more love. And no matter how much love we get, it's never really enough. And this leads to feelings of disappointment, frustration, desperation. It leads to the feeling disillusioned by someone when you meet someone and you think they're amazing and you go, oh my God, I found the one. And then 6 weeks later you go, how could I possibly think this was the one, right? Well, it's because you were getting some love from that person, but the love that they were giving you was never enough. And so you needed more and more and more. And ultimately the relationship became unfulfilling. And so most relationships, I would say, or most connections are made from this place of kind of being like a hungry ghost, right? Where it's like, I feel empty. I feel a sense of like loss and desperation. And I'm kind of clinging to whatever love I can find to try to fill me up, to try to make it better. And when you begin relationships like that, or when you seek relationships like that, they're going to show up all kinds of different ways. I mean, from this place, I've seen people get married 2 weeks after meeting each other. And I get it. Like I always say that. And some people are like, I married my husband 2 weeks after I met him and we've been married for 40 years. And it's like, okay, good for you. Like that's awesome. But 90% of the people, 99% of the people who get married after 2 weeks are divorced again 2 weeks later. Okay. So I'm glad it worked for you, but don't go telling everybody to do that because it's really bad advice, right? So, from that place, if you're approaching love as like a hungry ghost, you're going to have relationships show up all kinds of different ways, right? It's going to happen fast. It's going to happen slow. It's going to be really hot and heavy commitment. And then it's going to be a crash and burn, or it's going to be, I'm clinging and clinging, but there's never any commitment. I'm just kind of waiting around endlessly for this person. And, like from one extreme to the other and everything in between. It can show up all kinds of different ways. But this is what I've found with people who are actually doing the work consciously. Is that when someone is doing the work consciously, and what do I mean by consciously? I mean, they know what they're looking for, right? They have a clear intention. And I don't just mean, 6 foot tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, 6-pack abs, drives a nice car, has a good job. Like, I'm not talking about that, okay? I'm talking about the qualities of the relationship you want to have. You know how you want to feel in the relationship. You know how you want your partner to treat you. You have an idea of how your connection will be with each other, of the ways you'll spend time together, of the ways you'll speak to each other, the ways you'll treat each other, right? Like you have a clear vision of this relationship, which actually, going back to last week's conversation, this was a big part of what I was talking about last week. One of the biggest ways to not obsess in the early stages of dating is to have a clear vision for love that you're connected to. So if you have that vision, you're connected to it, you're intentional about it. And when I say intentional, I mean that when you meet someone, you're not just clinging onto them like a hungry ghost, but you're actually keeping a healthy detachment from that person, and you're measuring them up against your vision. And you're saying, does this person have the potential to live into the vision of a relationship that I have committed myself to, right? So instead of just clinging on to someone like a hungry ghost, you're actually like sitting back and being patient and seeing the relationship unfold and measuring the relationship up against your vision, right? So when you're approaching it consciously, there's a patience about it. There's I'd say a quality of discernment where you're not an easy sell, right? Instead of someone comes along and says, you're so pretty and I want to be with you. And you're like, oh my God, finally someone wants me, right? And instead of being like that, it's more like, okay, you think I'm pretty and you want to be with me. Awesome. Let me figure out if I want to be with you, right? So it's like, you need to convince me. I'm not an easy sell. I'm not just going to fall over myself to be with you just because you said you liked me, right? So these are some of the qualities of someone who's approaching a relationship consciously. And I would say one of the biggest parts of it is when you approach a relationship consciously, you're doing the inner work, right? So you have an awareness about your attachment tendencies, or what people call your attachment style, right? You have an awareness about how you relate in relationships. You have an awareness about your trauma, your triggers, the things that activate you. You have learned how to be with that stuff, right? So when you get triggered, when you get activated, instead of just flipping out, you've learned how to be with yourself in those moments, how to communicate with your partner. This is all part of approaching a relationship consciously. And that's not really the topic for today, so I don't want to go too much into that. But what I want to just say is that when someone is approaching a relationship consciously, or let me say this, when two people are both approaching relationships consciously and they find each other, okay, so there's person A over here, person B over here, they've both been doing the inner work. They both have a clear vision of the relationship they want. They're both patiently waiting. They're both being discerning about who they end up with and how they end up with them, right? These are two people in their own worlds that are doing the work, that are approaching relationships consciously. And then they meet, okay? When these two people meet and they make the connection and they, ultimately end up together, there is a certain timeline that their relationship is going to unfold along. Now, this is not a hard science, okay? So the benchmarks I'm going to give you along this timeline, feel free to add sometimes a few weeks or a few months one way or the other, even a few years in certain cases, okay? So I'm not going to say that these are hard and fast rules, but I'm going to give you a framework here so you have a realistic expectation about what to expect.